is Alice.
Hello, friends, welcome back. If you are looking for a complete and in depth review of this Resident Evil, the final chapter, you have come to the right place. In today's video, we'll break down the full story, explore the talented cast, analyze the box office performance, and highlight the most powerful moments that make this film stand out. So make sure to like, share, and subscribe, and let's get started. The story of Resident Evil, the final chapter, begins in a world that has already collapsed into chaos after years of destruction caused by the deadly T virus. Humanity now stands on the edge of extinction, with entire cities destroyed and most of civilization overrun by infected creatures. The atmosphere of the film feels dark, desperate, and apocalyptic from the very beginning, creating the sense that the final battle for survival is finally approaching. At the center of the story, once again, is Alice, portrayed by Milla Jovovich, the last major hope against the powerful Umbrella Corporation. Over the course of the series, Alice transformed from an ordinary woman trapped inside a mysterious underground facility into a hardened survivor and relentless fighter capable of battling overwhelming threats. Years of loss, betrayal, and constant warfare shaped her into someone emotionally scarred yet fiercely determined. The opening moments immediately remind viewers how much devastation has occurred throughout the previous events. The world is no longer recognizable as functioning civilization. Cities lie abandoned, deserts stretch endlessly across ruined landscapes, and surviving humans exist in small scattered groups, constantly threatened by infected monsters and Umbrella's military forces. The feeling of isolation and hopelessness dominates nearly every scene. Alice herself is exhausted after years of fighting. She has lost allies, witnessed countless deaths, and repeatedly faced betrayal from those she once trusted. Yet, despite everything, she continues moving forward because she believes giving up would mean allowing Umbrella to erase what remains of humanity completely. Her survival instincts remain strong, but emotionally, she carries the weight of endless violence and destruction. Meanwhile, the mysterious Red Queen reappears and delivers shocking new information to Alice. Earlier in the series, the Red Queen acted as a dangerous artificial intelligence protecting Umbrella's secrets at any cost. Now, however, the situation has changed dramatically. The AI informs Alice that humanity has only limited time left before total extinction becomes inevitable. According to the Red Queen, Umbrella Corporation possesses an airborne antivirus capable of destroying the T virus permanently. The cure is hidden beneath Raccoon City inside the Hive, the same underground facility where the nightmare originally began years earlier. This revelation transforms the story into a final, desperate mission back to the place where everything started. The emotional significance of returning to Raccoon City becomes immediately important. For Alice, the Hive represents trauma, betrayal, experimentation, and the beginning of humanity's collapse. Going back means confronting not only physical danger but also the painful memories connected to everything she endured throughout the series. At the same time, Umbrella Corporation continues preparing for its own vision of the future. Led by the ruthless Dr. Alexander Isaacs, portrayed by Ian Glenn, the corporation no longer focuses on saving humanity. Instead, its leadership views the apocalypse as an opportunity to rebuild civilization according to their own control and ideology. Human lives have become meaningless compared to power, survival, and corporate dominance. The film's atmosphere combines horror, science fiction, and action into a tense survival experience. Dangerous infected creatures roam ruined environments while constant ambushes and violent confrontations create non-stop pressure. Unlike traditional zombie stories focused purely on horror, the Resident Evil series emphasizes fast paced combat, large scale destruction, and relentless survival against impossible odds. As Alice travels across the wasteland toward Raccoon City, she faces attacks from infected monsters and deadly environmental hazards that reinforce how completely the world has fallen apart. Every location feels abandoned and broken, reflecting humanity's near extinction. At the same time, Alice begins questioning deeper truths about her own identity and past. Throughout the series, she struggled with memory loss, experimentation, cloning, and manipulation by Umbrella. The closer she moves toward the Hive, the more it becomes clear that hidden secrets about her existence still remain unresolved. The emotional tone during this stage focuses heavily on exhaustion, survival, and determination. Alice is no longer simply fighting to stay alive. She is fighting because this may be the final opportunity to stop Umbrella forever. Meanwhile, Umbrella prepares its defenses inside the Hive, fully aware that Alice is returning to the place where their long conflict first began. And as she moves closer toward Raccoon City, through a dying world filled with destruction and infected horrors, one painful realization becomes impossible to ignore. The final battle for humanity will begin exactly where humanity first lost everything. As Alice continues her dangerous journey toward Raccoon City, the world around her feels more lifeless and hopeless than ever before. Civilization has almost completely disappeared, leaving behind ruined highways, abandoned cities, and endless wastelands filled with infected creatures. Every environment reflects the total collapse caused by the T virus, reinforcing the idea that humanity is standing only moments away from extinction. The atmosphere during this stage of the film becomes increasingly tense and desperate. Unlike earlier entries in the series, where survivors still existed in larger numbers, the world now feels nearly empty. Most humans are dead, transformed into monsters, or hiding in isolated groups, desperately trying to survive another day. This overwhelming loneliness gives the story a darker emotional tone as Alice travels toward what may become her final mission. Alice herself remains physically and emotionally exhausted after years of constant warfare against Umbrella Corporation. She has lost nearly everyone she trusted throughout her journey, and the endless violence has hardened her into a relentless survivor. Yet, despite the pain and trauma she carries, she refuses to surrender because she understands that the future of humanity may depend entirely on what happens inside the hive. At the same time, the Red Queen's warning continues haunting Alice's thoughts. The revelation about the airborne antivirus hidden beneath Raccoon City changes everything. If the cure truly exists, it could finally destroy the T virus permanently and give humanity one final chance to survive. However, Alice also understands that Umbrella will protect the Hive at any cost. Meanwhile, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues emerging as one of the story's central threats. His vision for humanity is built entirely around control, selection, and corporate power. Unlike Alice, who fights to save ordinary people, Isaacs believes only certain individuals deserve to survive the apocalypse. His cold and calculating mentality reflects the corruption that destroyed the world in the first place. The film's action sequences become increasingly intense as Alice encounters deadly infected creatures throughout the wasteland. Fast moving zombies, mutated monsters, and dangerous traps constantly threaten her survival. The pacing rarely slows down, creating a non-stop atmosphere of danger and urgency that pushes Alice physically and mentally toward her limits. One particularly important aspect of the story during this stage is Alice's growing uncertainty about her own identity. Earlier films already revealed shocking truths involving cloning and experimentation. But now, deeper mysteries begin surfacing about her connection to Umbrella itself. The closer she moves toward the Hive, the more it becomes clear that her past may be even more complicated than she realized. This emotional conflict adds an important layer beneath the action and horror. Alice is not simply battling monsters or corporations anymore. She is also confronting painful questions about who she really is and whether her memories, experiences, and identity were manipulated from the beginning. Meanwhile, Umbrella Corporation continues preparing for Alice's arrival inside Raccoon City. Massive defenses, armed soldiers, and advanced technology protect the Hive as the company prepares for what they believe will be the final confrontation. Umbrella's leadership views Alice as their greatest threat because she represents resistance against their control and secrecy. As Alice finally approaches the destroyed remains of Raccoon City, the emotional weight of returning there becomes increasingly powerful. This is the place where the outbreak began, where countless people died, and where Alice's nightmare first started years earlier. The ruined city now stands as a symbol of humanity's failure, corporate greed, and irreversible destruction. The visual atmosphere surrounding Raccoon City feels dark and haunting. Broken buildings, collapsed streets, and infected creatures roaming through empty ruins create the feeling of a dead civilization haunted by the consequences of Umbrella's experiments. Every location carries memories of violence and catastrophe. At the same time, Alice encounters surviving fighters preparing their own resistance against Umbrella. These survivors understand that this may become humanity's last opportunity to stop the corporation permanently. Although trust remains difficult after years of betrayal and manipulation, they recognize Alice as one of the few people capable of challenging Umbrella directly. The emotional themes during this stage focus heavily on sacrifice, identity, and the cost of survival. Alice continues moving forward despite exhaustion because she understands there may not be another chance to save what remains of humanity. And as she prepares to descend once again into the Hive, beneath the destroyed ruins of Raccoon City, one terrifying truth becomes impossible to escape. The secrets hidden underground may be even more dangerous than the monsters waiting above. As Alice finally reaches the ruined remains of Raccoon City, the emotional and physical tension of the story intensifies dramatically. The once busy city now stands completely destroyed, transformed into a haunting wasteland filled with collapsed buildings, burning debris, and infected creatures wandering through empty streets. Every corner of the city reflects the catastrophic consequences of Umbrella Corporation's experiments, creating an atmosphere filled with death, fear, and irreversible loss. For Alice, returning to Raccoon City is deeply personal. This is the place where her nightmare originally began, the location where Umbrella's secrets first trapped her inside the hive years earlier. Every ruined street and broken structure carries painful memories connected to betrayal, experimentation, and the destruction of humanity itself. The emotional weight of coming back forces Alice to confront not only external danger but also the trauma that has shaped her entire life. At the same time, Alice's mission becomes even more urgent. The Red Queen's warning about humanity's remaining time continues pushing her forward. If the airborne antivirus hidden beneath the hive is real, it could finally destroy the T virus and stop the infection permanently. However, reaching it means descending once again into the underground facility where Umbrella's horrors first escaped into the world. Meanwhile, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues strengthening Umbrella's defenses around the hive. His obsession with control and survival reveals how deeply corrupted Umbrella's leadership has become. To Isaacs, ordinary human lives are expendable compared to the corporation's long term plans. Rather than saving humanity equally, Umbrella intends to decide who deserves to survive and who should be sacrificed. The film's atmosphere during this stage becomes darker and more claustrophobic as Alice moves closer toward the hive entrance. Unlike the open wastelands earlier in the story, Raccoon City feels like a graveyard filled with hidden dangers waiting around every corner. Infected creatures attack suddenly, while collapsing structures and violent ambushes create constant tension. Alice soon encounters a group of survivors hiding inside the ruins of the city. These fighters have spent years resisting Umbrella while trying to stay alive in a world consumed by infection. Although they initially distrust Alice because of her connection to Umbrella's experiments, they eventually recognize her as one of the only people capable of challenging the corporation directly. Among the survivors, there is a strong sense of exhaustion and hopelessness. Years of death and betrayal have left them emotionally scarred. Yet they continue fighting because surrender would mean allowing Umbrella to complete its domination over humanity completely. Their determination reflects one of the film's central emotional themes, the refusal to stop resisting even when survival seems impossible. Meanwhile, Alice herself continues struggling internally with questions about her identity. Throughout the series, learns shocking truths involving clones, memory manipulation, and experimentation. Now, as she approaches the hive once again, the possibility grows that Umbrella still hides secrets about her existence that could change everything she believes about herself. This uncertainty adds emotional complexity beneath the action and horror. Alice is no longer simply trying to defeat Umbrella physically. She is also searching for truth about who she really is and why Umbrella considered her so important for so many years. The action sequences become increasingly intense as Alice and the survivors battle infected monsters throughout the ruined city. Fast moving zombies, mutated creatures, and deadly traps create non stop danger, forcing the group to fight constantly just to stay alive. The film combines horror and action heavily during these scenes, emphasizing survival under extreme pressure. At the same time, Umbrella soldiers begin hunting the survivors aggressively. Advanced weapons, surveillance systems, and military forces protect the Hive entrance, showing how far Umbrella is willing to go to prevent anyone from uncovering the truth hidden underground. The emotional atmosphere grows heavier as the group prepares to descend into the Hive itself. Everyone understands the mission may become suicidal, yet there is no alternative left. If they fail, humanity's final chance at survival disappears forever. For Alice, especially, entering the Hive means returning directly into the center of her nightmares. The underground facility represents the origin of the apocalypse, the destruction of civilization, and the beginning of her long war against Umbrella Corporation. And as the survivors prepare to enter the darkness beneath Raccoon City, one terrifying realization becomes clear. The deeper they descend into the Hive, the closer they move towards secrets capable of changing everything they thought they knew about the apocalypse itself. As Alice and the remaining survivors prepare to enter the Hive beneath Raccoon City, the atmosphere becomes even darker and more oppressive. The ruined world above already feels hopeless, but the underground facility represents something far worse, the birthplace of the apocalypse itself. Every hallway, laboratory, and hidden chamber inside the Hive carries memories of experiments, death, and the beginning of humanity's collapse. For Alice, returning to the Hive feels almost like stepping back into the origin of her trauma. Years earlier, this was the place where she first woke up, confused, hunted, and trapped inside Umbrella's nightmare. Since then, the world has fallen apart because of the corporation's greed and obsession with control. Now, after everything she endured, Alice is forced to descend into the same darkness one final time. The survivors traveling with her understand the mission may be suicidal. Umbrella has fortified the Hive heavily, protecting it with armed soldiers, automated defenses, and infected creatures hidden throughout the underground facility. Yet, despite the danger, the group continues moving forward because the antivirus hidden below may be humanity's only remaining hope. The emotional tension within the group grows stronger during this stage. Years of survival in the apocalypse have left everyone suspicious, exhausted, and emotionally scarred. Trust has become extremely difficult in a world filled with betrayal and manipulation. However, the survivors recognize that Alice has spent years fighting Umbrella directly, making her the closest thing they have to a real chance at victory. Meanwhile, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues overseeing Umbrella's operations with ruthless determination. His belief that only selected individuals deserve survival reveals the horrifying ideology driving the corporation's leadership. Rather than viewing the apocalypse as a tragedy, Umbrella sees it as an opportunity to rebuild civilization under complete corporate control. This philosophy creates one of the film's most important emotional conflicts. Alice fights to save humanity despite all its flaws, while Umbrella believes humanity should be replaced and redesigned according to their own vision of perfection. The battle between them becomes more than physical. It becomes a struggle over the future of human existence itself. As the group enters deeper sections of the Hive, the environment becomes increasingly claustrophobic and terrifying. Narrow corridors, flickering lights, abandoned laboratories, and blood-stained rooms create constant tension. The underground setting feels cold and lifeless, like a tomb built from scientific obsession and human suffering. The film's horror elements become especially strong during these scenes. Hidden infected creatures attack suddenly from darkness, traps activate without warning, and every area feels capable of turning deadly instantly. Unlike the open action sequences above ground, the Hive creates an atmosphere of confinement where escape often feels impossible. At the same time, Alice's emotional conflict regarding her identity continues growing stronger. Clues hidden throughout the Hive suggest that Umbrella's connection to her may go deeper than she previously understood. Questions surrounding memory manipulation, cloning technology, and experimentation slowly begin resurfacing, making Alice increasingly uncertain about her own past. This internal struggle adds emotional weight beneath the constant action and violence. Alice has spent years fighting to protect humanity, yet she now fears that the truth about herself may be connected directly to the corporation responsible for humanity's destruction. Meanwhile, Umbrella soldiers launch increasingly aggressive attacks against the survivors as they descend deeper into the facility. Violent firefights erupt throughout the corridors, forcing the group into non-stop combat against heavily armed enemies and infected monsters alike. Every battle weakens the survivors further, increasing the feeling that very few people may leave the hive alive. The Red Queen also becomes increasingly mysterious during this stage. Earlier in the series, the AI acted as a dangerous system willing to kill humans in order to contain the virus. Now, however, her behavior appears more complicated. She provides Alice with information and guidance, yet uncertainty remains about her true motives and how much she is still hiding. As the survivors move closer toward Umbrella's inner chambers, the emotional atmosphere becomes heavier with every passing moment. The hive no longer feels like merely a facility. It feels like the physical embodiment of everything Umbrella created: fear, experimentation, manipulation, and death. For Alice, the mission has now become deeply personal. She is not only fighting to stop Umbrella or release the antivirus anymore, she is fighting to uncover the truth hidden beneath years of lies and manipulation. And as the group descends deeper into the darkness of the hive, one terrifying possibility begins haunting Alice more than anything else. The answers she has spent years searching for may completely destroy everything she believes about herself. As Alice and the surviving resistance fighters move deeper into the hive, the danger surrounding them grows more intense with every passing moment. The underground facility feels less like a laboratory and more like a massive tomb built from humanity's worst mistakes. Flickering lights, broken equipment, abandoned research rooms, and endless corridors filled with hidden threats create an atmosphere of constant fear and tension. The deeper the group travels, the more evidence they discover of Umbrella Corporation's true cruelty. Human experimentation, secret research, and horrifying biological projects are scattered throughout the hive, revealing the enormous scale of suffering caused by the company's obsession with control and profit. The facility itself becomes a symbol of scientific ambition corrupted by greed and complete disregard for human life. Meanwhile, the survivors continue struggling against overwhelming odds. Every hallway seems filled with danger, whether from infected creatures hiding in darkness or heavily armed umbrella soldiers protecting the corporation's secrets. The group becomes increasingly exhausted both physically and emotionally, as constant combat slowly reduces their chances of survival. Alice remains determined despite the growing pressure surrounding her. Years of fighting Umbrella transform her into a relentless survivor capable of enduring impossible situations. However, beneath her strength lies deep emotional exhaustion caused by years of betrayal, violence, and loss. She continues moving forward not because she believes survival is guaranteed, but because she refuses to let humanity's final chance disappear. At the same time, Alice's uncertainty about her own identity becomes increasingly painful. Throughout her journey, she already discovered shocking truths involving memory manipulation and cloning technology. But inside the hive, new information begins suggesting that her entire existence may have been shaped by Umbrella in ways she never fully understood. This emotional conflict becomes one of the most important parts of the story during this stage. Alice is no longer simply fighting external enemies. She is also struggling with the terrifying possibility that her memories, experiences, and sense of self may have been carefully manipulated from the beginning. Meanwhile, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues observing the survivors' progress through the hive while preparing his own final plans. His obsession with rebuilding civilization according to Umbrella's ideology reveals the corporation's complete moral collapse. To Isaacs, the apocalypse is not a tragedy to stop. It is an opportunity to create a new world controlled entirely by chosen elites. The film's action scenes become increasingly brutal and fast-paced as Alice and the survivors fight through narrow corridors and heavily defended sections of the hive. Gunfights erupt suddenly, infected creatures attack without warning, and deadly traps force the group into constant survival mode. The claustrophobic environment makes every confrontation feel more intense because escape routes are limited and danger can emerge from any direction. At the same time, the Red Queen continues guiding Alice through certain parts of the facility, though her true intentions remain uncertain. Earlier in the series, the AI acted without mercy in order to contain the outbreak. Now, however, she appears conflicted, offering assistance while still hiding important information. This uncertainty creates additional tension because Alice cannot fully trust anyone connected to Umbrella. One particularly emotional aspect of this stage is the growing realization that very few survivors may escape the hive alive. Each battle weakens the resistance further, forcing sacrifices and painful losses that reinforce how desperate the situation has become. The apocalypse has already destroyed most of humanity, and now even the people fighting to save what remains are slowly disappearing. As Alice continues descending deeper on the ground, fragments of Umbrella's hidden history begin surfacing more clearly. She learns more about the corporation's origins, the spread of the T virus, and the horrifying choices made by those in power long before civilization collapsed. These revelations deepen the emotional weight of the story by showing how greed and ambition created a catastrophe that consumed the entire world. The atmosphere during this stage feels increasingly hopeless yet emotionally determined at the same time. Alice understands that even if she survives, the world may never fully recover from the damage Umbrella caused. Yet, she continues fighting because saving even a small future for humanity is worth the sacrifice. For Alice personally, the Hive has now become more than just the location of a mission. It has become the place where every hidden truth about her life is waiting. And as she moves closer toward Umbrella's deepest secrets, one terrifying realization begins growing stronger. The closer she gets to the truth, the more she risks discovering that her entire existence may have been built on lies from the very beginning. As Alice and the remaining survivors push deeper into the hive, the situation becomes more desperate and dangerous than ever before. The underground facility now feels like a maze of death where every corridor hides another threat waiting to strike. The atmosphere grows increasingly claustrophobic, filled with flickering lights, mechanical noises, abandoned laboratories, and blood-stained rooms that reflect the horrifying history of Umbrella Corporation's experiments. The survivors are physically exhausted after constant battles against infected creatures and Umbrella soldiers. Every fight drains more energy and resources, making it painfully clear that the group may not survive long enough to complete their mission. Yet, despite the overwhelming danger surrounding them, they continue moving forward, because they understand the antivirus hidden within the hive may be humanity's final opportunity for survival. Alice remains the emotional and physical center of the group. Years of fighting through impossible situations transformed her into someone capable of enduring pain, betrayal, and fear beyond normal limits. However, beneath her hardened exterior lies emotional exhaustion caused by years of endless warfare against Umbrella. She has watched civilizations collapse, lost countless allies, and repeatedly discovered terrible truths about the world around her. Even so, she refuses to stop because surrender would mean allowing Umbrella's vision to become humanity's future forever. At the same time, Alice's growing identity crisis becomes increasingly painful. The deeper she travels into the hive, the more evidence appears suggesting that Umbrella manipulated her life far more extensively than she previously understood. Cloning projects, memory experiments, and hidden records force Alice to question whether the person she believes herself to be is even completely real. This emotional conflict adds powerful depth beneath the action and horror elements. Alice has spent years fighting for humanity while struggling to understand herself. Now, the terrifying possibility emerges that her memories and existence may have been shaped entirely by the same corporation she devoted her life to destroying. Meanwhile, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues directing Umbrella's operations with ruthless confidence. His belief in selective survival and corporate control reveals how disconnected Umbrella has become from ordinary humanity. To Isaacs, the apocalypse represents a chance to rebuild civilization according to his own ideology, where only chosen individuals deserve life while the rest of humanity is abandoned or sacrificed. The film's action sequences become even more intense during this stage. Narrow corridors turn into deadly battle zones as Alice and the survivors face armed soldiers, hidden traps, and mutated creatures designed through Umbrella's biological experiments. Explosions, gunfights, and sudden monster attacks create non-stop pressure, making every step through the hive feel dangerous. One especially frightening element of the hive is how alive it seems despite being partially abandoned. Automated systems continue operating, security programs activate unexpectedly, and infected monsters roam through dark corridors as though the facility itself refuses to die. The hive becomes more than just a setting, it feels like the physical manifestation of Umbrella's corruption and obsession with control. Meanwhile, the Red Queen continues interacting with Alice in increasingly mysterious ways. The artificial intelligence appears to possess information capable of changing Alice's understanding of everything. Although the AI claims to want humanity saved, Alice still struggles to trust anything connected to Umbrella after years of manipulation and betrayal. At the same time, painful sacrifices continue reducing the number of survivors accompanying Alice. Every confrontation inside the hive carries deadly consequences, reinforcing the brutal reality that very few people may leave the facility alive. These losses strengthen the emotional tone of the story, showing the enormous cost required simply to keep hope alive in a dying world. The deeper Alice travels, the more horrifying truths about Umbrella's past begin surfacing. Hidden files and conversations reveal how greed, arrogance, and obsession with power allowed the corporation to create a global catastrophe without concern for human consequences. Civilization's collapse was not an accident, it was the result of deliberate decisions made by people who valued control more than life itself. For Alice, this realization becomes deeply personal. Everything she suffered throughout the series traces back to Umbrella's manipulation, experimentation, and pursuit of dominance. The Hive contains not only humanity's final hope, but also the truth about how completely her life was shaped by forces beyond her control. The emotional atmosphere during this stage becomes increasingly heavy with fear, exhaustion, and determination. Alice understands that the answers waiting ahead may destroy her emotionally, yet she continues forward because stopping now would make every sacrifice meaningless. And as she moves closer toward Umbrella's innermost secrets, one terrifying thought becomes impossible for Alice to ignore. If the truth about her existence is finally revealed, she may discover that the person fighting to save humanity was never who she believed she was at all. As Alice and the few remaining survivors continue deeper into the Hive, the atmosphere becomes almost unbearable with tension and fear. The underground facility now feels completely detached from the outside world, like a massive machine built from death, secrets, and human suffering. Every corridor seems endless, every room hides danger, and every step forward brings Alice closer to truths she may not be emotionally prepared to face. The Hive itself begins revealing more horrifying evidence of Umbrella Corporation's corruption. Abandoned laboratories contain traces of failed experiments, infected victims, and biological research that demonstrates how far the corporation pushed its obsession with power and control. What once may have been presented as scientific advancement is now exposed as pure exploitation, where human life became nothing more than material for experimentation. Meanwhile, the survivors traveling with Alice grow increasingly exhausted and desperate. Constant battles against infected creatures and umbrella soldiers have pushed them beyond their limits. Yet they continue fighting because they understand there is no alternative left. If they fail to release the antivirus hidden beneath the hive, humanity's extinction becomes almost certain. Alice remains focused despite the emotional and physical pressure crushing around her. Years of surviving impossible situations hardened her into a relentless fighter. But inside, she continues struggling with fear, trauma, and uncertainty about her own identity. The deeper she travels into Umbrella's hidden world, the more it becomes clear that the corporation's connection to her life is far more disturbing than she imagined. At the same time, Dr. Alexander Isaacs grows increasingly confident that Alice can be stopped before reaching Umbrella's core systems. His cold and calculated worldview reflects everything wrong with the corporation itself. To him, ordinary people are disposable, and the apocalypse simply provides an opportunity to reshape civilization under elite control. Humanity, in Isaac's eyes, exists only as something to manage and manipulate. The film's action sequences during this stage become even more brutal and claustrophobic. Gunfights erupt suddenly inside narrow corridors, infected creatures attack without warning from dark corners, and advanced security systems transform the hive into a deadly trap. Every encounter feels dangerous because escape routes are limited and the group is constantly surrounded by enemies. One of the most emotionally important developments during this stage is Alice's growing realization that the truth about herself may completely redefine her understanding of her own existence. Hidden records, conversations, and clues scattered throughout the hive suggest that Umbrella carefully manipulated events surrounding her life from the very beginning. The idea that her memories and identity may not fully belong to her becomes increasingly painful. This internal conflict gives the story emotional depth beyond the action and horror. Alice spent years believing she was fighting to reclaim her life and humanity from Umbrella's control. Now, however, she begins fearing that her connection to the corporation may be much deeper and more tragic than she ever realized. Meanwhile, the Red Queen continues guiding Alice through parts of the facility while slowly revealing more information about Umbrella's past. Unlike earlier in the series, the AI now appears conflicted between its original programming and the horrifying reality of what Umbrella became. Yet, despite offering assistance, the Red Queen still hides important truths, creating constant uncertainty about whether Alice can fully trust anything she says. The emotional atmosphere becomes heavier as more survivors fall during the journey. Sacrifice after sacrifice reminds Alice how costly this mission truly is. Every death reinforces the reality that humanity's survival depends on a handful of exhausted people fighting inside a facility built to destroy them. At the same time, the Hive begins feeling almost symbolic of humanity's collapse itself. The deeper Alice travels underground, the more she uncovers layers of greed, manipulation, and ambition that ultimately destroyed civilization. Umbrella did not simply create monsters, it created a system where power mattered more than human life. For Alice personally, the mission is no longer only about releasing the antivirus or stopping Umbrella. It has become a search for truth, a search to understand who she really is beneath years of manipulation and lies. And as she moves closer toward Umbrella's most heavily protected secrets, one terrifying possibility begins consuming her thoughts. If her entire life was engineered by Umbrella from the beginning, then the person she became may have been part of their plan all along. As Alice and the remaining survivors descend even deeper into the Hive, the mission becomes increasingly hopeless and terrifying. The underground facility now feels less like a scientific complex and more like the buried remains of humanity's downfall. Endless metal corridors, malfunctioning systems, abandoned laboratories, and hidden chambers filled with death create an atmosphere where danger feels unavoidable from every direction. The emotional pressure surrounding Alice continues intensifying as the truth about Umbrella slowly unfolds around her. Throughout her long battle against the corporation, she believed she was simply fighting to survive and protect humanity from extinction. But now, hidden information inside the Hive suggests her connection to Umbrella may be far more personal and complicated than she ever imagined. Meanwhile, the remaining survivors struggle to continue under constant attacks from infected creatures and heavily armed Umbrella forces. The group is physically exhausted, emotionally drained, and painfully aware that they may never leave the Hive alive. Yet, despite fear and hopelessness, they continue moving forward because the antivirus hidden below may represent the last chance humanity will ever have. The film's atmosphere during this stage becomes darker and more emotionally heavy than ever before. Unlike earlier action focused sections, the story now emphasizes revelation, sacrifice, and psychological tension alongside horror and combat. Every room inside the Hive feels like it contains another hidden piece of Umbrella's terrifying history. At the same time, Dr. Alexander Isaacs continues revealing the horrifying extent of Umbrella's plans. The corporation never intended to save humanity equally after the outbreak. Instead, its leadership planned to preserve only selected individuals while allowing the rest of civilization to die. This cold philosophy exposes how deeply Umbrella values power and control over actual human life. Isaacs himself represents the complete moral collapse caused by unchecked ambition. He views the apocalypse not as a tragedy but as an opportunity to create a world shaped entirely by Umbrella's authority. His obsession with survival through domination contrasts sharply with Alice's determination to fight for ordinary people, despite all the suffering humanity endured. Meanwhile, the Red Queen finally begins revealing more of the truth hidden behind Alice's existence. One of the story's biggest emotional turning points emerges as Alice discovers shocking information connected to cloning technology and Umbrella's past. The woman Alice believed herself to be was not exactly who she thought. The revelation deeply shakes Alice emotionally. She learns that she is actually a clone created from Alicia Marcus, the daughter of Umbrella's founder, Dr. James Marcus. The real Alicia suffered from a severe genetic disease that caused rapid aging, while Alice was designed as part of Umbrella's experimentation involving cloning and memory implantation. This revelation changes everything Alice believed about herself. For years, she fought to protect humanity while trying to reclaim lost memories and understand her identity. Now she realizes many of those memories were artificial constructs based on another person's life. The emotional impact of this discovery becomes devastating because it forces Alice to question what parts of her existence were ever truly her own. Yet, despite the shock, another important truth also emerges. Even if Alice was created artificially, the emotions, choices, and sacrifices she made throughout her life were still real. This realization becomes emotionally powerful because it separates identity from origin. Alice understands that being a clone does not erase the humanity she developed through her experiences, relationships, pain, and moral decisions. The life she lived still belongs to her. Meanwhile, the action inside the hive continues escalating violently. Umbrella soldiers launch relentless attacks while mutated infected creatures roam through the collapsing facility. Explosions, gunfights, and brutal confrontations force the survivors into non-stop combat as they race against time to reach the antivirus. The emotional atmosphere becomes increasingly tragic as more lives are lost during the mission. Every sacrifice reminds Alice how much humanity already suffered because of Umbrella's greed and manipulation. The survivors are no longer fighting for victory in a traditional sense. They are fighting simply to give humanity any future at all. At the same time, the real Alicia Marcos is finally revealed as an elderly woman hidden within Umbrella's inner leadership. Unlike Isaacs, Alicia eventually recognizes the horror Umbrella unleashed upon the world. Her presence adds emotional complexity to the story because Alice now confronts the living source of her own existence face to face. For Alice, this moment becomes deeply personal. The truth she spent years searching for is finally standing in front of her. And as the hive begins collapsing under violence and chaos, one final realization becomes clear. A person's humanity is not defined by how they were created, but by the choices they make when faced with fear, suffering, and destruction. As the hive begins collapsing into chaos, the story reaches one of its most emotionally intense stages. Explosions echo through the underground facility. Emergency alarms continue sounding endlessly, and the remaining survivors race against time while surrounded by infected creatures and umbrella soldiers. The atmosphere feels desperate and claustrophobic, as though the entire structure is dying alongside the world above it. For Alice, the emotional impact of discovering the truth about her identity continues weighing heavily on her mind. Learning that she is a clone created from Alicia Marcus completely changes her understanding of her own existence. The memories she carried, the identity she believed belonged to her, and the life she spent fighting to reclaim now feel uncertain and fragmented. Yet, despite the shock and confusion, Alice begins understanding something deeply important. Although Umbrella created her artificially, the choices she made throughout her life were still genuinely her own. Her courage, sacrifices, relationships, and determination were not programmed emotions, they were experiences she truly lived. This realization becomes emotionally powerful because it allows Alice to separate her humanity from the circumstances of her creation. Meanwhile, the real Alicia Marcus finally emerges as a tragic figure trapped by the consequences of Umbrella's greed and ambition. As the daughter of the corporation's founder, Alicia once believed scientific advancement could improve humanity's future. Instead, Umbrella became consumed by power, leading directly to civilization's collapse. Now, old and physically weakened by disease, Alicia witnesses the horrifying destruction caused by the corporation tied to her family name. At the same time, Dr. Alexander Isaacs grows increasingly ruthless and desperate as Alice moves closer toward releasing the airborne antivirus. Isaacs refuses to allow humanity's future to escape Umbrella's control, even if it means sacrificing countless lives. His obsession with domination and selective survival fully exposes the moral corruption at the center of the corporation. The film's action sequences become non-stop during this stage. Violent firefights erupt across collapsing corridors while infected monsters attack from every direction. Narrow hallways turn into deadly battle zones as the survivors struggle to push deeper toward the antivirus chamber. The constant destruction creates overwhelming pressure, making every moment feel like a race against inevitable disaster. The hive itself begins physically breaking apart under the chaos. Explosions damage entire sections of the facility, systems malfunction uncontrollably, and fires spread throughout the underground complex. The destruction feels symbolic, representing the collapse of Umbrella's entire empire and the consequences of its unchecked arrogance. Meanwhile, Alice's emotional transformation continues evolving. Earlier in the series, much of her journey centered on survival and revenge against Umbrella. Now, however, her mission has become larger than personal anger. She fights because she believes humanity deserves a future free from manipulation, fear, and corporate control. This emotional shift becomes especially meaningful after learning the truth about herself. Alice realizes that identity is not determined by biology or artificial origins. It is shaped by choices, morality, and the willingness to protect others despite suffering. Even though Umbrella created her, she chose to stand against everything the corporation represented. The remaining survivors continue sacrificing themselves throughout the mission, reinforcing the heavy emotional tone surrounding the story's climax. Every death reminds Alice how enormous the cost of Umbrella's actions has been. Humanity's survival now depends on only a few exhausted individuals fighting inside the ruins of the very place where civilization first began collapsing. At the same time, the Red Queen continues assisting Alice while revealing more hidden truths about Umbrella's past. The AA explains how greed, fear, and obsession with control pushed powerful individuals to create the apocalypse while believing they could manage its consequences. These revelations deepen the tragedy of the story because humanity's destruction was caused not by unavoidable fate but by deliberate human choices. As Alice moves closer toward the antivirus chamber, the emotional and physical tension reaches near breaking point. The hive is collapsing around her. Enemies attack from every direction, and time itself becomes the greatest threat as the T virus continues spreading across the planet. Yet, despite exhaustion, pain, and the horrifying truth about her origins, Alice refuses to stop.
because she finally understands something stronger than fear.
She understands that humanity is defined not by perfection or creation, but by the ability to choose compassion and sacrifice even in a world destroyed by darkness. As the hive reaches its final stages of collapse, everything inside the underground facility descends into total chaos. Explosions tear through corridors, security systems fail completely, and infected creatures roam freely through the breaking structure. The survivors are pushed into a desperate race against time as the facility that once represented Umbrella's greatest achievement now becomes its final tomb. Alice moves forward with unwavering determination despite exhaustion, injuries, and emotional weight. The truth about her identity still lingers in her mind, but she no longer allows it to weaken her purpose. Instead, she accepts that her existence, whether original or created, does not define her humanity. What defines her is the life she has lived, the people she has lost, and the choices she continues making in the face of destruction. The survivors accompanying her continue falling one by one as Umbrella's defenses intensify. Every corridor becomes a battlefield filled with gunfire, explosions, and sudden attacks from infected monsters. The group is steadily reduced, emphasizing the devastating cost of reaching the antivirus chamber. Yet each sacrifice strengthens Alice's resolve rather than breaking it. Dr. Alexander Isaacs becomes more desperate as Alice nears her objective. His belief in controlled survival and corporate dominance drives him to extreme actions, revealing how far Umbrella has fallen into moral corruption. To Isaacs, releasing the antivirus represents the loss of Umbrella's final control over humanity's future, and he is willing to destroy everything to prevent it. Meanwhile, the Red Queen continues guiding Alice through the collapsing hive while revealing final fragments of Umbrella's hidden truth. Her role becomes increasingly complex, no longer purely an antagonist or ally, but something in between, shaped by conflicting programming and evolving understanding of humanity's suffering. The hive itself begins to fully collapse under its own destruction. Structural damage spreads rapidly, sealing off passages and forcing survivors to take increasingly dangerous routes. The facility that once symbolized scientific advancement now reflects the consequences of unchecked ambition and absolute power. As Alice reaches closer to the antivirus chamber, the emotional intensity reaches its peak. Every step forward represents both hope and danger, hope for humanity's survival and danger of complete annihilation if she fails. The weight of responsibility becomes immense as she understands that the fate of the entire world now depends on her actions alone. At the same time, the truth about Umbrella's experimentations becomes fully clear in Alice's mind. The corporation did not simply create a virus, it created a system of control, experimentation, and selective survival that ultimately destroyed civilization. Humanity's downfall was not accidental, it was the result of deliberate choices made by people who valued power above life itself. This realization deepens Alice's resolve even further. She no longer fights for revenge or personal answers. She fights to ensure that no one else will ever suffer because of Umbrella's ideology again. The final corridor leading to the antivirus chamber becomes the most dangerous part of the entire journey. Umbrella forces launch their last defensive attempts, infected creatures swarm aggressively, and the collapsing hive creates constant environmental hazards. Despite all of this, Alice continues moving forward with relentless focus. At this stage, the emotional tone shifts from confusion and discovery to pure determination. Everything unnecessary has been stripped away, only the mission remains. Alice has accepted the truth about herself, the truth about Umbrella, and the truth about humanity's suffering. Now there is only one objective left: stop Umbrella, release the antivirus, give humanity a chance to survive. And as she steps closer to the final chamber where everything will be decided, one final realization settles within her. Even in a world destroyed by greed and fear, hope still exists in the choices of those willing to fight for something greater than themselves. As Alice finally reaches the core section of the hive, the atmosphere becomes almost unrecognizable from anything earlier in the film. The underground facility is now in full collapse. Metal structures groan under pressure, emergency systems spark and fail, and explosions ripple through multiple levels at once. What was once Umbrella Corporation's most secure stronghold has become a dying labyrinth where survival depends on seconds, instincts, and sheer determination. The remaining survivors are nearly gone at this point, reduced by constant battles against Umbrella soldiers and relentless infected creatures. Every step forward costs lives, emphasizing how catastrophic the situation has become. Yet, Alice continues pushing ahead, driven by the understanding that failure here would mean the complete extinction of humanity. The emotional weight of that responsibility isolates her further, but it also sharpens her focus. Dr. Alexander Isaacs makes his final desperate attempts to stop her. His obsession with control and selective survival reaches its breaking point as he realizes Umbrella's plans are slipping beyond recovery. Isaacs no longer acts with strategy or long term vision, only desperation remains. His actions reflect the complete moral collapse of Umbrella itself, where power has replaced humanity entirely. At the same time, the Red Queen continues guiding Alice through the final corridors of the hive. Her presence becomes even more complex in these moments as she provides crucial information while still maintaining emotional distance. She exists between machine logic and something resembling awareness of human suffering, making her role in the final events increasingly uncertain and layered. The hive's destruction intensifies dramatically as Alice moves closer to the antivirus chamber. Entire sections of the facility collapse behind her, sealing off escape routes and forcing her into a narrow path forward. Fires spread through damaged corridors, electrical systems explode unpredictably, and structural instability turns every step into a risk. Despite everything collapsing around her, Alice remains steady. Her transformation throughout the series reaches its final stage here. She is no longer driven by confusion about her identity or anger toward Umbrella alone. Instead, she operates with complete clarity of purpose. The truth about her existence no longer weakens her, it strengthens her resolve. She understands now that identity is not about origin but about action. Every sacrifice made by the survivors, every loss suffered throughout the journey, and every revelation about Umbrella's corruption has led to this final moment. The antivirus represents more than just a cure for the T virus. It represents humanity's last chance to reclaim its future from corporate control and biological destruction. As Alice pushes forward, Umbrella's final defenses activate. Automated systems, remaining soldiers, and last resort containment measures are deployed in a desperate attempt to stop her from reaching the chamber. The conflict becomes a final storm of violence inside a collapsing structure where survival and mission success are both hanging by a thread. Yet, through all the chaos, Alice continues advancing because at this point she understands something irreversible. Even if she is a clone, even if her memories were manipulated, even if her origin was created in a laboratory, her choices are real, her sacrifices are real, and her fight for humanity is real. The closer she gets to the antivirus chamber, the more everything reduces down to a single truth. There is no turning back anymore, only forward. And as the final barriers begin to break and the last path opens before her, one thought remains clear in Alice's mind. This is not just the end of Umbrella's experiment, this is the moment where humanity either survives or disappears forever. As Alice enters the final chamber of the hive, the atmosphere reaches its absolute peak of tension and collapse. The facility is now fully breaking apart. Explosions shake the structure from every direction. Corridors are sealed by falling debris, and emergency systems fail one after another. The once controlled underground empire of Umbrella Corporation is now nothing more than a dying structure consumed by its own destruction. Inside this final space lies the airborne antivirus, humanity's last chance for survival. Everything Alice has endured, years of fighting, loss, betrayal, and discovery, has led to this single moment. The weight of that realization is overwhelming, but her focus remains unshaken. She understands that if the antivirus is not released, the T virus will continue spreading until nothing human remains. Dr. Alexander Isaacs makes his final move, driven completely by desperation and obsession. His belief in Umbrella's vision has collapsed into chaos, leaving only the need to prevent Alice from undoing everything the corporation built. In his final form of resistance, Isaacs represents Umbrella's complete moral failure: power without purpose, survival without humanity, and control without compassion. The Red Queen's presence becomes crucial in these final moments. She reveals the last pieces of information needed to activate the antivirus, confirming that the solution has always been within reach, hidden beneath layers of secrecy and corruption. Her role reflects the strange duality of intelligence without humanity, capable of logic and guidance, yet shaped by the consequences of human greed. Alice moves through the collapsing chamber with absolute determination. Every step is surrounded by destruction, but she no longer hesitates. The confusion about her identity, the trauma of her past, and the weight of Umbrella's manipulation have all transformed into clarity. She understands now that her origin does not define her purpose. She is not just a clone. She is not just a survivor. She is the result of every choice she made in the face of suffering, and those choices were always human. As Isaacs launches his final attack, the conflict erupts into one last violent confrontation inside the collapsing hive. The battle is intense, chaotic, and symbolic of everything Umbrella became: uncontrollable ambition consuming itself. But Alice refuses to be stopped. With everything she has left, she pushes through the final resistance. At last, she reaches the system controlling the airborne antivirus. In a moment of final clarity, she activates it. The release begins. Across the world, the antivirus spreads through the atmosphere, targeting the T virus and beginning the process of destroying the infection that ended civilization. It is not instant salvation, but it is a turning point, the first real reversal of the apocalypse since it began. As the hive continues collapsing around her, Alice narrowly escapes the destruction. Umbrella's underground empire finally falls, consumed by the consequences of its own creation. Isaacs is defeated, the Red Queen's role reaches its conclusion, and the nightmare that began in secret laboratories finally comes to an end. When Alice emerges from the ruins of Raccoon City, the world outside is still broken, but not beyond hope. For the first time in years, there is a possibility of rebuilding, of survival, and of a future no longer completely controlled by Umbrella's legacy. In the silence after destruction, Alice stands alone once again, but not as someone lost in identity or haunted by uncertainty. She stands as someone who chose to fight even when everything was already falling apart. And as the sun rises over a ruined world beginning to change, one final truth remains clear. The end of Umbrella was not the end of humanity. It was the beginning of whatever humanity chooses to become next. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this review, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more amazing movie breakdowns. See you in the next video.